They called humanity fragile, frail bones, weak flesh, a species of dreamers clinging to a small blue world at the edge of the void. To the empires, we were nothing more than background noise, children playing with fire, destined to burn ourselves out before the stars even noticed. But the silence was what unsettled them most. Because when the storms came, when shadow fleets swept across the spiral arms and worlds, burned, every empire had its scars. Every empire had its victims. Except one. Humanity, never targeted, never touched. At first they thought it mercy, then luck, then a joke whispered in the corridors of power. But the longer it lasted, the more the silence became a storm all its own. Why? Why did no empire dare to strike us? What secret lay hidden behind our fragile smiles and trembling hands? The truth spread like fire in dry grass, and when they finally learned the reason, the laughter died. The pride shattered, and dread settled like ash across the stars. Because the galaxy had always believed humanity was prey, they were wrong. We were the storm waiting in silence. We were the shadow behind the fire. And when the day finally came, when the empires dared to test us, they learned what no one had spoken aloud. Fragile is not the same as weak. The colony on Vega 3 was alive, not in the way the great capitals of the empires boasted, with endless towers of glass and light, but in the small ways that made a place feel like home. Children ran barefoot across the synthetic grass, beneath a false but beautiful sky. Their laughter carried across the plaza, high and unbroken, like birdsong after rain. Traders haggled over bolts of fabric and crates of grain, their voices rising and falling in a rhythm older than the stars. And the ships hummed. Old engines coughed and sputtered, patched together with spare parts that had already lived 3 lives. Pilots swore at cracked seals. Engineers wiped sweat from their brows. And yet somehow, those ships still flew. Fragile, yes. Imperfect always. But there was a warmth to it, a fragile hope that whispered, "We belong here too." For a time, the settlers believed it. They believed the galaxy had overlooked them, that their laughter could outshine the storms beyond the stars. They worked, they dreamed, they built lives out of dust and sunlight. But unease is a patient predator. The first shadows came as whispers, anomalies buried in sensor logs, faint signals that flared and died like embers in the void. Engineers told themselves it was static. Commanders muttered about faulty relays. But in the long nights, when the generators flickered and the corridors dimmed, the silence pressed too close. On Vega 3, the laughter did not vanish all at once. It frayed. Children still played, but their parents' eyes flicked too often to the sky. The hum of engines carried a tremor, a question left unspoken. At the trading posts, arguments ended not in laughter, but in silence, voices cut short as if swallowed by some unseen presence. And then came the signals, not the bright, clear calls of allies, but faint echoes, distorted, broken, as though carried by a storm far away. Ships reported phantom contacts at the edge of their scanners. A patrol vanished between 2 jump points, leaving behind only a half-finished distress call. Still, the colony pressed on. Because that is what humanity does. We laugh against despair. We dream against darkness. We cling to fragile engines and fragile hopes because the alternative is surrender. But every night as the stars bled through the false sky of Vega 3, the silence deepened. It was no longer the gentle hush of sleep, but the suffocating quiet before a storm. Some said it was nothing. Some said it was everything. And some, those who had seen what the empires had suffered, simply listened, their faces pale in the flickering light, knowing what silence always meant. It meant the storm was already coming. The storm did not arrive with thunder. It came as silence. One night, the colony on Vega 3 lost contact with a patrol ship, static, then a half sentence, then nothing. Command swore it was interference. But the next day another signal went dead, and then another. The laughter of children still echoed in the plazas, but quieter now, as if the air itself carried weight. Parents forced smiles. Traders haggled in whispers, and every pair of eyes, no matter how busy, kept straying toward the sky. And then, the signal cut out. A mining station near the asteroid belt, gone. No distress call, no survivors. Just silence where hundreds of lives had been. Panic spread like fire through dry brush. People spoke of shadows in the void, of ships too fast, too silent, too merciless to be real. Humanity had always known it was fragile. But fragility was one thing. Being erased without a trace was another. The first fleet was small, hastily gathered. Patrol craft, repurposed freighters, Even old civilian haulers armed with weapons barely fit for a museum. They launched anyway, because that's what humanity does. They went out singing. Engineers still patching power cores as the ship slipped into jump space. They promised the colonists, "We'll find them. We'll bring them home." But they didn't come home. At the edge of Vega 3's system, the fleet shattered like glass. One transmission made it back. A scream, metal tearing, then silence, and for a moment despair crushed everything. Colonies burned. Outposts went dark one by one, like candles snuffed by a storm. The invaders did not conquer, they erased. They left nothing. No warnings, no messages, no survivors, just ruins drifting in the cold. Humanity bled. Humanity broke. But humanity did not kneel. In the ashes, whispers began to spread. In the cramped corridors of refugee ships, in the flickering light of failing generators, one phrase began to rise, trembling at first, then stronger. "We are still here." The next fleet was larger and angrier. Old grudges died as rival colonies pooled ships. Soldiers who once swore they'd never fight, beside each other, now stood shoulder to shoulder. The fury of the forgotten had found its target. The battle was chaos. Hundreds of human ships met the shadow fleets, and again they broke. But this time, they broke fighting. Transmissions poured across the void, shattered voices screaming defiance into the dark. "Tell them!" Static, not afraid. Static, for Earth. And then silence. Always silence. It should have ended there. It should have ended with fire and ash. But humanity is stubborn. Humanity clings to hope with bloody hands. Every loss became a lesson. Every defeat carved a new weapon from the wreckage. They learned how the shadows struck. They learned how they moved, how they cut through fleets with terrifying silence. And then humanity adapted. Engineers tore apart wrecks, welding scraps into weapons never meant to exist. Colonists volunteered to fly suicide missions just to test a single theory. Old warships, museum relics, were gutted and reborn in fire. Humanity bled, but humanity learned. The storm did not end, but the waves changed. Despair still crashed across them. Colonies burned. Families wept, but fury rose to meet it. Hope sparked in the ruins. A message spread, carried in whispers, graffiti, even carved into bulkheads. "We will not kneel." And then came the turning point. A refugee convoy, dozens of ships, thousands of civilians, cornered by shadow fleets at the edge of a dead star. They had no weapons, no defenses, nowhere to run. The shadows closed in, and then silence. Not the silence of defeat, the silence of humanity holding its breath, because out of the dark came 3 ships, 3 human warships, patched together, engines screaming, hulls bleeding sparks. They were outnumbered 100 to 1. They did not turn away. They charged. The first ship rammed headlong into the enemy line, tearing itself apart to open a gap. The second unleashed every weapon it had, burning itself to cinders just to buy a minute more. The third, crippled and broken, carried the civilians through. Only one ship survived. But the convoy lived, and across the stars the whispers grew louder. Fragile is not the same as weak. The storm raged on. More fleets fell. More colonies died. But humanity had changed. No longer fragile dreamers hoping to be ignored. No longer prey waiting to be erased. They became fire. They became fury. They became the silence that follows thunder. And though the galaxy still asked the question, why no empire ever dared to target humanity, those who had seen the storm already knew. Because breaking us only made us stronger. Because erasing us only made us roar louder. Because no matter how many fleets burned, we are still here, and we will not kneel. Climax. The galaxy had seen storms before. Empires had risen, burned, and fallen. Worlds had been erased. Armies had drowned in silence. But never, never had it seen this. At the edge of the Orion Rift, the last human fleet gathered. Not a fleet of strength, a fleet of remnants. Ships with hulls stitched from wreckage. Engines held together with prayer. Crews running on fury and hope. Every other species had abandoned the field. The shadows were endless, vast fleets of silence and fire, cutting through the void like blades through flesh. And still, humanity remained. They were broken. They were bleeding. But they were unbroken. The war ended, but the silence remained. It lingered across the stars, heavy and unshakable, a ghost that refused to fade. The empires rebuilt their fleets. Worlds scarred by fire turned their eyes back to the heavens. But no one, not even the conquerors of old, dared to speak lightly of humanity again, because the scars were there for all to see. Graves stretched across colony fields. Rows upon rows of simple markers etched into the dust. Names whispered in fire and ash, carried in the breath of survivors who had nothing left but memory. Entire cities reduced to hollow shells. Where laughter had once rung and children had once played, humanity had survived, barely. But survival had changed them. They no longer carried the innocence of fragile dreamers clinging to life. They carried the silence of those who had seen despair and answered with fury. They carried the pride of those who had stood on the edge of extinction and refused to kneel. Across the empires, whispers spread. They had mocked humanity once, called them weak, fragile, forgettable. But fragility had not broken them. It had sharpened them. It had made every loss a lesson, every scar a warning, every grave a vow. And now, the galaxy asked the question it once mocked. If this is what humanity does when cornered, what happens when they rise by choice? The answer was not given in words. It was written in silence, in the battered ships still flying, patched with steel and memory. In the colonists planting crops in burned soil, laughing softly through tears. In the children who ran barefoot across synthetic grass, their laughter carrying higher than the shadows could ever reach. Hope lived. Pride lived. Humanity lived. The empires shuddered, for they had glimpsed the truth. Humanity was not fragile glass waiting to shatter. Humanity was fire waiting to burn. And though the stars themselves might fall silent one day, the echo of that fire would remain, etched into the fabric of the cosmos. So let the grave stand. Let the scars remain. They are not marks of weakness. They are monuments of defiance. Because when the void came to erase us, humanity did not vanish. Humanity roared. And in that roar, the galaxy learned a truth it will never forget. Fragile is not the same as weak, and humanity will never kneel.